Tractate Chagiga is a Masechta that talks about the holidays, the mitzvahs on the holidays, and not the same as Beya. Beya is a Masechta that talks about all the laws of holidays similar to Shabbos and the prohibitions. But Chagiga talks about the mitzvahs of in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and maybe even afterwards, if there's an obligation, different obligations that a person has to go to Yerushalayim for the three holidays, three festivals, Pesach, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, and the mitzvahs of bringing certain karbanos, and the mitzvah of simcha, joy, which could apply today as well. The mitzvah of joy applies today as well, but it could apply to meat, according to some opinions, or the mitzvah of simcha, and the mitzvah of the different karbanos. Really, it includes a karban oila, which is a burnt offering, and it includes two shlamim, two peace offerings. One is called the Shalmei Chagiga, the peace offering of the Chagiga, of the holiday. The other one is called a peace offering of joy, Shalmei Simcha, peace offering of joy. So there are different karbanos, sacrifices. And the Mishnah talks about the obligation, and who has that obligation to come to Yerushalayim during the three festivals and bring those sacrifices. And the Mishnah will exclude numerous cases, numerous people that are exempt. And the exemptions are based on different reasons. Some reasons have to do with the fact that a person doesn't have das, a person who's doesn't have knowledge, a child, a shaita, someone who's a fool, a katan, a cheresh, which we'll soon see what those examples are, what they refer to. But literally, a cheresh means someone who's deaf, and shaita is someone who's a fool, crazy, and a katan is a child, which we'll see what that refers to. They would be exempt for reason of not having das, which is generally the reason why they're exempt from mitzvahs. But then you have other cases that are specifically exempt from the obligation of going to be oila regel, and they have different reasons. Each case has which of course the Gemara will go through, and then the Mishnah will deal with the value of the karbanos. Is there a certain value that they must be? When you buy an animal, does it have to have a certain value? Or could it be a tiny, like for example, when we bring the kaparas, when we do kaparas, which is of course not a sacrifice, but they want to make as much money as they can, so they give you the tiniest chicken for the kaparas. Well, would that work? Of course, you don't bring chickens for sacrifice, but would that work with an animal? Would you bring a tiny, cheap animal, a weak animal, or an old animal? An animal that has very little value. Would it be? Would that be okay? So we'll be dealing with that, and of course the Gemara gets into all the different cases, and for example, different types of avadim, slaves, and we will see who is exempt from this mitzvah. Yes, David.
Regarding evaluations for korbanos, isn't there a whole chapter, a whole tractate called evaluations? Yeah.
So Erchin is a little different, because Erchin talks about the vow that a person makes, that he's going to gift the Beis Hamikdash a certain amount of money. That's the value of this person, or the value of this child, or the value of this. So that's Erchin. And the Bezdin, they have to, there's demei, the value. There's two types of Erchin. There's the erech, and then there's the demei. And the erech is clearly clarified in the Torah. What depends on a person's age. And but then there's also the demei, the value of a person, which also does talk about an erchin. But here we're talking about the value of the actual sacrifice that you're bringing. Does it have to have a certain value, minimum value? So we're going to start now the Mishnah. Hakol chayavim b're'iyah. Everyone is obligated in re'iyah. Re'iyah, Rashi learns, means you have to make yourself visible, be seen in the Azara, which is the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, on the regel, on the holiday. So everyone is chayiv to go, except for chutz, except for the following people. The following people are exempt from going to be oila regel. I don't know if you remember, but we learned in the book of Shmuel that Shmuel's father, Elkanah,
yeah.
he started a very major tradition of bringing people to the Mishkan. This is not the Beis Hamikdash. This is before the Beis Hamikdash was built, before David HaMelech was around, before Shlomo, who built the Beis Hamikdash way before that, in the time when, before Shmuel was even born. So before Shaul was king, this is in the time of the Shoftim, it was not popular to go to the Mishkan for the holidays. People, it was very unpopular, possibly because Eli HaKohen was the Kohen Gadol in the Mishkan in Shiloh, and his kids were not so impressive the way they treated everyone, and for whatever reason they acted that way, and it caused a big turnoff, and a lot of people were not going to the Mishkan. And Elkanah actually started everyone, got everyone, and tried to encourage everyone, and initiated a whole a program and a whole project to get people to start coming to the Mishkan to be oila regel. And he was very successful. He would take different trips every holiday. He would go this path, he would go that path, and he would stay. They would sleep in the public area so people would see them and make a big demonstration there that we're going to show people, make a big announcements. Have the news come, and he would tell everyone we're going to be oila regel, and he would go to the Mishkan. Now, with regard to the Mishkan, it seemed people weren't so into it, maybe because the Mishkan was considered a temporary dwelling, and maybe the obligation was not as clear cut as it was in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. But in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, it's clearly written that Shalosh Pam Hashana Yerah Kol Zechorcha, 3 times a year, all of your males are obligated in going to be oila regel to the Beis Hamikdash. So when we mention it in the Musaf davening and so on, that there is a mitzvah to be oila regel, to go to the Beis Hamikdash for the 3 major holidays. So the Mishnah says everyone is chayiv b're'iyah, and literally re'iyah means seeing, but the meaning over here is based on the verse Yera'eh kol zechorcha. All your males should be seen. So everyone's obligated in that seeing mitzvah, which is the mitzvah of being seen in the Beis Hamikdash, and chutz, and then the Mishnah gives the exclusions. And this is a nice list of exclusions. Cheresh literally means someone who's deaf, shoite, a fool, v'katan, and a child. V'tumtum, v'androgynous. A tumtum and androgynous are people that have a physical misformation. Their form is they have tumtum is someone whose private area is covered over, so we do not know if he's a male or a female. And androgynous is someone that has both signs of a male, has a private that has a male organ and a female organ. That's an androgynous. And the truth is, the Tractate of Bikurim, in the end, the last chapter over there, does talk about the laws of a androgynous, how he's considered, because such a person, there's all these complications and legalities of Jewish law. How do we treat him? Do we consider him a male or a female, or the chumrah? Do we give him the chumras of both? And are we unsure if he's a male or a female, or is there a possibility that he's a min b'fnei atzma? Maybe there's a totally different category of someone who's not male and not female. See, a tumtum, everyone agrees that he's either a male or a female. We just don't know what he is, because it's covered over. There's some type of a skin that covers it, and we can't tell if he's a male or a female. But a androgynous, there is a third option that maybe he is a min bifnei atzma, at least according to one opinion there. Anyway, our Mishnah mentions that both of these cases are exempt from being oila regel. Yes, Avraham.
Wouldn't if the person had a womb, would define them as female?
But what about if they also have a male organ?
Right.
That would be
like it's. Yeah, but I mean that's all they need is a male organ, right? And a prostrate. So, but if a womb would be definitely that person could have a baby or whatever.
Yeah, but that person could also definitely impregnate a woman.
Right, right.
So if he also has a male organ, you could say he's definitely a male. But he also has a womb, definitely a female. I guess he's both. I guess he's a. So you can't prove it from one organ because they have the other organ as well.
Uh-huh.
So that's that basically messes up the situation and makes it complicated.
Plus, how would you know that they have a womb before they had X-rays and machines to look inside while the person was still alive?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but maybe the gynecologists might be able to know. I don't know. Yes, Ben.
In the dictionary, it says tumtum, be made stupid, or be besotted. I don't know what besotted is.
I don't know either.
Besotted. Besotted.
Maybe there's some Latin or English word.
Besotted.
Okay, I
The
don't
word is besotted.
Okay, and then
Besotted.
yes, Mordechai. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, isn't there a medrash that originally both Abraham and Sarah were tumtum?
I don't know that medrash, but definitely possible. I'm not, I don't know every medrash. It's definitely maybe, I don't know. That's what you remember reading.
Yeah, I think I remember like the ways or something.
I mean, the Gemaras they talk about it. Tumtum shenikra. Tumtum shenikra is a tumtum that is this skin that covers over their private area, and we don't know if they're male or female. That there are cases where they would cut it open and be able to see. They would somehow remove that extra layer of skin that covers it over, and tumtum shenikra, that we find out if they really are male or female. So it's a tumtum is considered a suffix. We just don't know. The androgynous creates more problems because there is such an opinion, at least, that he's a min b'fnei atzmai. Okay, so the Gemara continues and says, the Mishnah continues and says that all these cases so far are exempt from being oila regel, from going up to the Beis Hamikdash for the 3 major holidays. V'nashim va'avadim, in women and slaves she'enam va'avadim she'enam meshachrorim, and slaves that are not freed. So a slave that is not freed is exempt. Women, of course, are exempt because we said Yera'eh kol zechorcha, right? We said that all your males have to be seen in the Beis Hamikdash, and that of course excludes women. Avadim she'enam meshachrorim, slaves that are not freed are also exempt. And why would slaves that are not freed be exempt? Because a slave, we're talking about an Eved Kanani, a slave that's a Canaanite slave, he would be exempt because he is chayiv in mitzvahs like a woman. He's obligated in mitzvahs like a woman. And of course, we're talking about a slave that does his semi-conversion. In other words, he's partially converted, but he's not, you can't count him for a minion. He's not 100%. He's somewhere in the in-between stage of being Jewish. And at that in-between stage, he is actually obligated in doing mitzvahs like a woman. Now, but he is a slave, and the law is once he becomes freed, he will be considered a full-fledged Jew, and that's why there were cases we did learn about a rabbi that freed his slave in order to make a minyan, and the freeing of a slave, which is normally not encouraged, it's against the Torah. The Torah says "Lo'olam behem ta'avodu." They're supposed to be work for you forever. But nevertheless, there are examples we find that it was, and we will soon see in our Gemara also an example of a case where it would be a mitzvah to free him. And once he's freed, then it would seem that he would be obligated in being oila regel. So the Mishnah says only when he's not freed, he's exempt. It sounds like if he would be freed, he will be obligated because he will be considered a ger, a convert.
Rabbi.
Just 1 second. We have two people with their hands up besides you, Moshe, and I think they were first. I don't know who between the two of you. Maybe David. I think you were first, David.
Yeah. The question is, Chagiga, is that the next tractate that would come in the order after brachas? Or
No, initially we were going to do Shabbos. That would have come right after brachas, at least in Gemara. In Mishnayos, there are other Mishnayos that come after brachas, but they don't have Gemaras on it. We don't have the Gemaras on it. There are, but the Tractate Chagiga is the last tractate of the Moed Masechtas of the holiday tractates. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, Yevamos Samach Dalet is where it says that Abraham and Sarah were both originally Tzimtzumim.
Does it explain that they were born that way, and then before they got married, they were? What does it say over there?
Hold on a second. Yeah, it says that Rabbi Yami says that Abraham and Sarah were originally born Tzimtzum and infertile, and then miraculously turned into a fertile husband and wife in their old age.
Now, when it says tumtum, does it mean the way in other words, what it means over here? Does it mean they were? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. It's not
the
a well-known. It's a Gemara in Yevamos. It's not a well-known Gemara, I'll tell you that. But okay, thank you for. But that's interesting that they were born that way.
Yeah, and it also.
Yeah, I'm listening. Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, and it also says that Rabbi Yami points to in Yeshaya non Aleph, but it says something. There's about the rock from which you were hewn and the hole in the pit from which you were dug, and that symbolizes Abraham and Sarah's genitals being uncovered and remade.
That's a source. Okay. So Moshe, I'm sorry.
Yeah, are we talking about a Abed Ivrit or an Abed Kanani that you're referring to?
An Eved Kanani.
I see. Okay, thank you.
So an Eved would be someone that, if he's a slave, he's not exempt. If he's a slave, he's exempt from being oila regel. Now, if he would be freed, he would be obligated in being oila regel. Now, there is a question over here, and that is a ger obligated to be oila regel? You would think, of course, ger is just like a regular Jew. But there is a rule that in order to be oila regel, you have to own land. How do we know you have to own land in order to be obligated to be oila regel? In order to be obligated to be oila regel, it says by the mitzvah of oila regel that you should not be worried when you leave your land that enemies will come and take your land away from you. And if that's according to that, every Jew that owns a piece of the land of Israel is, of course, obligated. But what would happen if you sold your land? And what would happen if a ger buys a piece of land? Would he be obligated in being oila regel? And the general case is that when you buy a piece of land, you only own it until yovel, or until the person redeems it. And in that case, you don't really own land permanently. It's only like a rental. And therefore, it would seem that a ger would not be obligated to be oila regel. That would seem, according to that an eved that is freed would also not be obligated to be oila regel. If a slave is freed, he becomes a ger. He's now official convert, but he doesn't own land. And even if you give him, well, the option of owning land would, which basically returns to the owner at yovel doesn't really work. However, there are cases where you could own land. One of them is that if a person, if he marries a woman who's in a family that only has females, if there's only girls in the family, so they inherit their father. If there's a boy, then the boys inherit the land. If there's no boys, we learn from the daughters of Tzlafchad that the girls inherit the land. Besides the portion of Eretz Yisrael, which we learn from the daughters of Tzlafchad, but in the laws of nachlas, of inheritance, the daughters inherit the land if there's no brothers, if there's no sons. So the daughters inherit the land, and then the husband inherits the land from his wife. So basically, there are cases where a ger would have land. Another case would be if you buy a house in a batei arei chayma, in an area that has a fence around it, that has a gate, has a wall around it. If there's a city that has a wall around it and they sell a house there, then the owner sells the house. He has to redeem it within a year. If he doesn't redeem it within a year, then you own it forever. So the buyer could actually own that land if the seller doesn't redeem it within the year. So that would be a case where a ger would own a piece of land forever, and therefore he would be obligated to be oila regel. So again, we're talking about cases that are exempt from being oila regel, and we said an eved that is not freed, which sounds like if an eved would be freed, if a slave would be freed, he would be obligated in being oila regel. But we said, but there is a problem because he doesn't own land. And to own land in Eretz Yisrael is not so simple. But we did say that there are examples where you could own land, and therefore an eved that is freed would be subject to possibly being chayav in oila regel if he owns land. And the same thing would be a ger. They're obligated to be oila regel in coming up if they own land. Again, the reason for this exemption if you don't own land, that you wouldn't be obligated in going to Eretz Yisrael, is because in the verses that talk about going to Eretz Yisrael, it deals with a challenge. And the challenge is that what are you going to do? Every man is going to go to Israel, is going to go to Yerushalayim and go to the Beis HaMikdash. What about your property? You're going to leave it empty, or just the women there? It's going to be very dangerous. And Hashem says, don't worry. You don't have to, this is right in the Torah. Hashem says, you don't have to worry. Hashem is going to protect it. And that is therefore you should come and be oila regel. Therefore you have to. So the Gemara does understand from that only if you own land is it a mitzvah to be oila regel. Yes, David.
Every Jew is supposed to have land that they own in Eretz Yisrael. I just don't know where my portion is.
Right. That is an interesting point, that we all have a portion. We're considered to have a portion in Eretz Yisrael. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, if everybody is required to go, but it's impossible that all of Israel would go to Jerusalem at the same time.
Rabbi,
Not impossible. That's what it says about they would all bow down and they would all find miraculously it would extend.
Yeah, but that's the certain amounts. If 12 tribes of people go all at once, I don't think there would be room.
But Hashem says, you don't think,
Yeah.
but I know.
Okay.
Rabbi,
I have a good
Ezra had a
question.
Ezra.
You said that everyone's supposed to own land. That's not true because the Leviim don't own land. They were given a certain number of cities. So how do you reconcile one with the other?
So you're wondering if that would exempt the Levium, if they don't really own land. But the Levium could. Well, the Levium, anyone could own lands, and therefore they're in all these. There are cases where you would be able to.
We
Mishnah's
can't
not
own
gonna
land
exclude
because we
them.
were told, Rabbi, we
What?
were told we were not owning land. You know, we were given cities,
Right.
but
But
not
again, the Mishnah is not
land
going to
per se.
exclude anyone that could own land. So all these cases could own land, except an Eved is exempt. All these other cases are exempt. Even if they own land, they would be exempt. But the cases that we're talking about that, the Levium don't own and the Gerim, they would be basically in the same category of the fact that they could own land, and therefore the Mishnah is not going to exclude them. In other words, it's possible to own land. That's the point. Okay, so I think someone else had a question.
yes, Rabbi.
Yeah.
No, that's the question I wanted to ask that Ezra was asking. But also,
Okay.
I mentioned, what about also if you want to be buried in Israel, and not everybody can be buried there, so you think that would be your plot, your portion of land too, that you're buried, just like you have a kever there, that would be that would be the for having a reason for having land. I mean, just to be buried there, not everybody can be buried in Israel, you know what I'm saying? But
Not exactly. I don't know what you're bringing up from that. What do you mean?
no, what I'm saying is that it's very costly to be buried in Israel. To have a
Yeah, but we're not dealing with that now. We're dealing with if your obligation to go to be Oila Regel. You're telling me about the fact that there's inflation now, or, you know what I mean? Okay, so we're going to go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that women are exempt from being Oila Regel. Slaves that are not freed are exempt. Hachiger. A chiger is someone who is lame. He is exempt. V'hasuma, and a blind person is exempt. V'hachoila, and a sick person. V'hazokein, and an elderly person. Umi she'ena yachol leilech la'alois beraglov, and a person who is not able to go with their feet to Yerushalayim. Now, what does that mean? So, what it means is that we learned in the previous tractate that you're not allowed to wear shoes on Harabayas. So, what about someone who needs shoes in order to walk? Some people need some type of supportive shoes, otherwise they can't walk, they'll fall. So only a person who is able to go beraglov, with their feet, barefoot, and only such a person could be obligated in being Oila Regel. Someone who is not able to would be exempt. Now Rashi over here says from Yerushalayim to the Azara, but the commentaries say it means from Har Habayis, from the mountain, from the Temple Mount to the Azara. They have to be able to walk from the Temple Mount to the Azara barefoot. Someone who would not be able to do that would be exempt. So again, we just exempted a lot of people. A lot of people are exempt from being Oila Regel. They don't have das. Tumtum androgynous. We're not sure if they're male, they're female. So they're exempt. A woman is exempt. Of course, because it says Yeroah calls a chorcha. And these people, we don't know if they're male or they're female. And we mentioned that androgynous, according to one opinion, might even be an alternative, a third sex, which is not a is also would seemingly be exempt. Nashim, women are exempt. Avadim she'enim meshuchrarim, slaves that are not freed would be exempt. Chiger, a lame, suma, blind, and chayla, sick, zakein, elderly, and someone who can't walk with their feet, with barefoot. And we said that's from Harabayas to Azara, to the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, what is a katan? A zehu katan. What is a katan? Who is this person who is exempt from? Who is this child? What age? So here we have a machlekes, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Kol she'eno yachol lirkov al kasefav. Anyone that cannot ride on his father's shoulders, Kasefav shel aviv, on the shoulders of his father. V'la'alois, and go miyushalayim laharabayas, from Yerushalayim to Harabayas, to the Temple Mount. He would be exempt from being Oila Regel, from going to be seen by the Beis Hamikdash. But if he is able to walk, to ride on his father's shoulders, according to Beis Shammai, he would be obligated in being Oila Regel, going to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, the Rashi over here says that he would not be obligated biblically, he would be obligated rabbinically. Hitilu chachamim, very interesting term that Rashi uses, that he says the father and the mother. Normally we think of chinuch as a mitzvah on the father, even though the mother, of course, does a lot of the chinuch. But generally we think of the mitzvah of chinuch on the father. Rashi over here says the mother as well. The chachamim, hitilu chachamim, the chachamim placed an obligation al aviv v'al imai, on the father and on the mother, lechanchai b'mitzvahs, to be mechanechim with mitzvahs. And being that he's going to be obligated in chinuch midrabanan, so what is the state? What is the age? What is the minimum age that he would be obligated to in this rabbinic law? So the Gemara the Mishnah tells us that it's not from a baby is not obligated. Not obligated to bring him to be mechanechim, but you would be obligated, according to Beis Shammai, from when he could ride on his father's shoulders from Yerushalayim to Harabayas, which is, it would basically be a certain stage where he would not start crying and want to come down and so on, and where you could, practically ride on his father's shoulders. Beis Hillel argues and says it's a much older age, but that would be where the mitzvah of chinuch would begin.
Rabbi,
Yes, Ben.
when you mentioned before Elkanah, also Elkanah's wife didn't want to go with him when she had the baby. She
Right.
wanted to wait till he goes up a little.
Right. Which shows us that women were not obligated and babies are not obligated.
Yeah.
Right. Good point. So the Mishnah continues and says that it gives a reason of Beis Shammai. Does it give a reason? No. It says different Beis Shammai. These are the words of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel says, Kol she'eno yachol lechos b'yadei shel aviv. Whoever can't hold the hand of his father, v'la'alois mi Yerushalayim l'Harabayis, and go from Yerushalayim to Harabayis. And here it gives a reason. Shenamar, as it says in the pasuk, shalosh regalim. It says the 3 holidays, but what is the term used? It uses a term regalim. Regalim also means feet, walking. So the way Beis Hillel understands it is you have to be fit to walk. And only someone who could walk would be obligated. And if an adult would be exempt because they can't walk, so the Chachamim exempted a child similar to the biblical obligation on an adult. And if the adult would not be obligated to go if he couldn't walk, so the child would also not be obligated. The rabbis didn't obligate a child in a situation where he's not of age to be able to walk from Yerushalayim to Har HaBayis. And that would be the opinion of Beis Hillel, which would be the halacha, that would be those that would be the minimum age of obligation of chinuch for aliyah l'regel, for going up to the Beis Hamikdash to be seen by Hashem. The Beis Hamikdash is the age of being able to hold one's father's hand and go from Yerushalayim to Har HaBayis. Now, the Mishnah jumps to now the karbanis, the sacrifices. And the sacrifices, interestingly enough, one of the sacrifices is also called oilas re'iyah. And so we talked about everyone's chayev in re'iyah. One of that's the third word of the Mishnah was hakol chayavin bere'iyah. Re'iyah was the third word of the Mishnah. Now that word re'iyah, we translated it to mean to be oila regel, to go up for the holidays to Beis Hamikdash. That's what re'iyah is, at least the way Rashi learns. But now we're going to see that there's really another word re'iyah, which means the carbon, oilas re'iyah, called the burnt offering of re'iyah, which means that whenever you would go up to the Beis Hamikdash to be seen, you also were obligated to bringing a carbon for being seen. So there's two terms that are used that are sometimes they're sometimes refer to this, sometimes refer to that. Rashi in our Mishnah learned that the first time in our Mishnah when it talks about re'iyah, talking about the mitzvah to be oila regel, and the second time in the Mishnah when it talks about the re'iyah, the value of it, re'iyah shtei kesef, it's talking about the carbon, oilas re'iyah, the sacrifice that was brought when you went to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, why did you have to bring a sacrifice when you went to the Beis Hamikdash? Because there is a mitzvah in the Torah that says, "V'lo yera'u panai rekam." You should not
in my face.
See my face empty-handed.
Sure.
So, what does
My
that mean?
face should not be
Empty-handed?
seen. It's,
Yeah. Okay, thank you. What does it mean, empty-handed? It means without a sacrifice. So there was a mitzvah to bring a sacrifice as part of going to be oila regel. So if you were oila regel, you brought this oilas re'iyah, you brought this sacrifice. And the Mishnah mentions now, what is the value of this oilas re'iyah, of the sacrifice called the re'iyah sacrifice, the burnt offering. There was also two, as I mentioned earlier, there were two other sacrifices that were brought. One was called a shalmei chagiga, the peace offering of the holiday. And the other one is called shalmei simcha, peace offerings of joy. Now, the chagiga people we're a little familiar with. How are we familiar with the carbon chagiga? Because
Pesach.
the Pesach, on Pesach, thank you, Ezra. On Pesach, why do we have an egg on the Seder plate? The egg on the Seder plate symbolizes the carbon chagiga. The zraya symbolizes the carbon Pesach. The carbon Pesach was supposed to be eaten al hasoiva, right? It was supposed to be eaten when you're satisfied already. So you would need food to eat to be satisfied, and then you would eat the carbon Pesach on top of that. And so the Chagiga was the holiday regular, on all holidays. And then on Pesach, you would have, after you ate the Chagiga and you were satisfied, you would then have a carbon Pesach. You would have the carbon Pesach, and that was the way you fulfilled the mitzvah of eating the carbon Pesach al hasoiva, which means while after you're satisfied to have the carbon Pesach on top of that like a dessert. So the Mishnah here tells us that what is the value, what is the minimum value of these carbonis? So Beis Shammai says, Ha're'iyah shtei kesef. The re'iyah, which is this carbon, the sacrifice of re'iyah, of oilas, the oilah, the burnt offering, it has to be at least 2 kesef. 2 kesef means 2 ma'a kesef, 2 coins that were silver coins, and it has to be at least 2. That's the minimum value of the oilas re'iyah. V'chagiga ma'a kesef. And the chagiga, which again, which was the applicable to all the holidays, well, just like re'iyah, which is applicable to all the holidays. The chagiga was, but it was a peace offering. The chagiga, which is a peace offering, the re'iyah was a burnt offering. The chagiga, which is a peace offering, that is, according to the Beis Shammai, the value of it could be half the value of the re'iyah. The re'iyah was 2 kesef. The chagiga is 1 ma'a kesef. And Beis Hillel says ha're'iyah ma'a kesef v'chagiga shtei kesef. Beis Hillel says that the re'iyah, the carbon re'iyah, which is the burnt offering, was 1 ma'a.
Are you?
The burnt offering was 1 ma'a, and the chagiga was shtei kesef, was double that. So it's a machlekes, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, which one has to be minimum value 2 silver coin, and which one minimum value is 1. It's they argue on the 2 extremes. Okay, so we have our Mishnah here that talked about, at least the way we learned Rashi's shot, is that the beginning part of the Mishnah talks about going to be Oila Regel, going up to the Beis Hamikdash for the 3 holidays, and who's exempt from it. And then the Mishnah talks about the different sacrifices, the Oilas Re'iyah and the Shalmei Chagiga. Now, the burnt offering means that it's totally burnt, and you don't get to eat any of it. And the Shalmei Chagiga is actually was eaten by the owner. It's a korban shlamim. It's a peace offering, and the owner gets a nice portion of it to eat. Only certain parts of it were burnt on the altar. Now, the Gemara begins with trying to figure out, why does the Mishnah make this general statement? Hakol chayavin b're'iyah. Whenever the Mishnah makes this type of statement, and it does it often, it uses these general terms, and it makes everyone is obligated. It generally is including someone that you might think would be exempt. That's why the Mishnahs make these statements. It's generally an inclusive statement to add something that someone that you would think might not be obligated. And the Mishnah says, no, everyone is obligated in Re'iyah. And that would include that person that you thought maybe wasn't obligated. And so the Mishnah, the Gemara asks, Hakol la'asuye mai. What is the word Hakol? Who is it including? So the Gemara says, la'asuye mi shechetye eved b'chetye ben chayru. A person who's a half a slave. He's half a slave and half a free man. And the question was, would he be obligated in being Oila Regel? On the one hand, he's a slave. On the other hand, he's a free person.
How can he be half a slave?
How could someone be a half a slave? So the way you become a half a slave is this. A slave costs, let's say, $100,000. You buy the slave. Now he pays, the slave gets his $100,000. And now the problem is you don't have $100,000 to pay for the slave. So you go to your friend Yankel and you say, Yankel, I don't need a slave every single day of the week, and you don't need a slave every day of the week. I could use him 3 days. You use him 3 days. I'll pay $50,000. You pay $50,000. And we'll buy this slave, and I'll have him Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you have him Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, right? So now
sounds like
we're all
cleaning
set.
lady.
So you have you have the slave. You have him 3 days a week. He has him 3 days. You only paid 50,000, not 100,000. Now the thing is that you, for whatever reason, you needed a minion and shul, and you said, you know what? I'll free the slave. So you freed him and you made a minion. So now he doesn't work on your 3 days a week because he's free, but he's still owned by the other guy. Yankala still owns him. So he's now a slave that is partially a slave and partially a free person.
But he's only free certain days.
Right.
So maybe only on those days he can be considered half a slave.
So this is a very interesting question that you bring up. When you're a partner with someone, do you own every single atom in that molecule, in that person, in that item? Or do you just own it on your days? Or do you really own every little piece? Everything is broken in half and you own everything, every single moment you really own. You're just working out a deal with him that he can have him these days and you have him the other days, but you really own him exactly like the other person owns him, and you own every little part of him, every particle and every molecule of that person you own. And this is a famous question, and there's a discussion about it. There's a famous, there's a Ran in Durham that talks about partners. By partners, do you own every little particle of every item when you're a partner with the person?
So I'm not the only troublemaker that thinks about it.
Now, so the question is that the issue that you bring up is an interesting issue, and I'll tell you why. Our Gemara is going to bring down soon that there's a big problem if a person is a half a slave. What's the problem? Who can he marry if he's a half a slave? Not allowed to marry a Jew. Why not? Because
he's not a full free man.
He's not a full Jew. He's considered like a goy in a certain sense. He's a partial slave. He can't marry
Kanani.
A Kanani because he's a Jew. So who does he marry?
Nobody.
So he can't. The bottom line is he can't get married to anyone. But according to your question and the way you were thinking, maybe you could say maybe he could get married during the day that he's free and get divorced that night. So would he be allowed to get married on that day in the morning and then be with his wife, a Jew? He's free. So marry a Jew that day.
Rabbi, there's
then
another
get divorced
example.
that night. And then the next day, maybe he could marry a guy.
Rabbi, there's another example.
Yeah.
Somebody doesn't become Jewish until he goes to the mikvah.
Yeah, no, he went to the mikvah.
So if he doesn't go, no, but I'm saying if
Now,
that
he
man
can't marry a
doesn't
regular.
go
One
to
second,
the
I actually-
mikvah,
Yeah.
if the man doesn't go to the mikvah, he cannot become Jewish until he goes to the mikvah, right? So he's partially Jewish, but he's not quite Jewish until he goes to the mikvah. Well, the same thing here. He's not quite released from his from being an Eved until he's done with both halves. You know,
What do you mean? Who's partially Jewish before they go to the mikvah?
the girl that doesn't go to the mikvah. He's not
After
Jewish
his
yet.
you mean he
Right.
had circumcision, but he didn't go to the
Yeah.
mikvah?
Right?
You remember when we spoke about that?
Yeah.
Wow, you got a good memory. It's over
I
a year
think I
ago.
remember everything we spoke about, but maybe not. I don't know.
That we did bring an interesting case. There was a whole question about a person who's a convert who had his circumcision, but he didn't go to mikvah yet.
Yeah.
And the question was, is he allowed to keep Shabbos?
Right.
Right? Was that the case? I think that was
Yeah.
the case.
He cannot keep the mitzvah.
And there was a big debate among the is he somewhere is there a middle stage
Yeah.
where he doesn't have to be Mechalel Shabbos, Is there a middle stage? Anyway, the bottom line here is that I have to correct something. When he's a slave that day, he's not allowed to marry a guy. He could marry a shifcha, a maid servant who's a guy, a guyish, a maid servant. He would be allowed to marry. So on the day that he's Jewish, maybe he could marry the day that he's free, maybe he could marry a Jewish girl, and then divorce her that night. And then on the day that he's a slave, maybe he could marry a shifcha, a goyish, a maidservant, and maybe divorce her that night as well. Now, it would cost him a lot of money to pay for the rabbi to do the weddings, these every day doing another wedding and then the divorce. I don't know, it's not so simple and cheap. But would this be an option? Now, the simple answer is no, because even when he's free, he still has an element of slave in him, which is going back to this original question that when you're a partner, do you own more than just how you divide it? Like you really own a little portion in everything. Even on the day that he's free, he's still got an element of slaveness in him for the tomorrow of today. In other words, the tomorrow that's in the today, the element of tomorrow that's here, that's the sort of is like a philosophical concept.
The obligations here. For tomorrow.
The obligations of tomorrow that are today. There's some responsibilities. He's subjugated to the laws of tomorrow today. So there is a concept of slave in him that's applicable today for that's sort of like similar to this idea of being a partner where you own a little of everyone owns a little of everything. Yes, David.
You were saying about if the person's half and half, who's he going to marry? Well, can he marry a woman that's also half and half?
No, he wouldn't be able to, because his side of slave is marrying her side of freedom, and her side of slave is marrying his side of free. It ends up being it doesn't work out, because in every molecule of his being, there's the opposite that issue that prohibits them from getting married. So bottom line is that sounds like a cute idea of marrying someone different every day, but
not practical.
But it doesn't sound like it would work. Because of the side of slaveness in him and the side of freedom in him that would prohibit him. Okay, so we have here the Gemara giving us this example of a person who's a slave and a half free. And we explained how that could happen. That one of the partners that owned him freed him, and therefore now he's slave every other day. One day he works, one day he's free. One day and so the Gemara is using that as an answer to explain what does our Mishnah say. Everyone is obligated in Re'iyah going to the Beis HaMikdash for the holidays. And that means including a person who's one day free and one day a slave, who's a partial slave, partial free. He would be obligated in being oile regel. And the Gemara says that it sounds good, but we have a problem. Ula Ravina de Amar, but according to Ravina, that says Misha Chatzi Eved Chatzi Ben Chayrin, a person who's a half a slave and a half a free person, Pater Min HaRe'iyah is exempt from Re'iyah. Hakol Lasuye Mai. What is he going to do with the Hakol? And again, we have an opinion that doesn't agree with this. And the opinion of Ravina. Ravina says the person who's half a slave is not obligated in being oile regel. He says clearly. And we'll see that in the Gemara, how he explains it. He learns it from another part of the Mishnah. But basically, Ravina says that he's going to be exempt. Now, the Mishnah said, Hakoil, everyone is obligated in being Oila Regel. And our Gemara is looking to figure out who is included in the everybody. Who is it adding? Who are we adding to this general statement? Who are we including? And the Mishnah wanted to say a person who's half a slave. But Ravina doesn't agree with that. A person who's half a slave, Ravina says clearly is exempt. So according to Ravina, you're still stuck. What does the Mishnah mean according to Ravina? That everyone is obligated in Re'iyah, in being Oila Regel and going to the Beis HaMikdash, everyone is obligated, so it must be including someone that you might think would be exempt. So what is Ravina? How is Ravina going to learn this? Hakol asuyei mai. According to him, what is the word hakoil including? So the Gemara answers, La asuyei chiger b'yam rishon nespashet b'yam sheni. We have an answer. Person who's lame on the first day of the holiday, let's say Sukkot. So he has his he's isn't able to walk, and miraculously he gets healed that night. All of a sudden he's all better. So the next day he wakes up, he's walking around. So now he's no longer lame, and it's a second day of Sukkot. Is he now obligated in being Oila Regel? On the one hand, he missed the first day, which maybe you could say is the most important. On the other hand, there's the rest of Sukkot. Should he go and travel for the rest of Sukkot to Yerushalayim? On the one hand, he missed the first day. Okay, but still, there's the rest of Sukkot, another 6 days of Sukkot, and then Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. So he is seemingly, you definitely could look at it both ways. On the one hand, the first day maybe is the main day. On the other hand, at least you can, can you make it up? So the rest of Sukkot, is that a good enough makeup? Is it now? The Mishnah tells us Hakol Chayav B'Riyah. Everyone is obligated in being Oila Regel. That would include this person. That even he that wasn't able to come on the first day, he is going to be obligated on the other days. He is going to be obligated to come to the rest of the Sukkot. So that sounds good, like a good answer, except that the Gemara says, we already learned there's two opinions about this. Hanichol Lamanda Amar, this goes good. This is fine with the opinion that says Kulan Tashlumen Zelazem. All the days are a Tashlumen. They are a fulfillment to each other. That means if you miss the first day, the second day, all days are equally obligated. But if you say that the first one is the main one, and all the other days are just makeups, if you want to learn that way, that the other days are really makeups for the first one, they're called a tashlumen to the first one. So then, if this is a makeup for the first one, the only person who needs to do a makeup for the first one is if he was obligated on the first one and he didn't do it. Was a person who's lame obligated on the first day of Sukkot? No, he was lame. He was exempt. If you're exempt, you don't need a makeup. A makeup is for someone that transgresses and he didn't go, then you need a makeup. But if you were not obligated in the first place because you were exempt, you don't need a makeup, and therefore the Mishnah can't say that you would be obligated in Re'iyah. You're not obligated in Re'iyah because you were not obligated on the first day, which is the main day of Re'iyah. The other days are also, obligations, but they're only makeups for the first day. And those makeups work if you were obligated on the first day and you didn't do it. Now you do a makeup for those days. But if you weren't obligated on the first day because you were lame, and now you got better, they just came out with Advil, and now you're able to walk. All of a sudden, it just went to the on the markets, and now you're able to walk. So now you're going to say, am I obligated to go? Because the thing is, well, if it's only a makeup for the first day I wasn't obligated, so now you don't have to do makeups. And so the Gemara says that this issue of a person who missed the first day because he was exempt, this issue is subject to an argument between the rabbis.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Because of that, this can't be the meaning of the Mishnah according to all opinions. So we're going to need another answer. Yes, Ezra.
So the obligation of a iyah, is that supposed to be only for the first day?
So the Gemara seems to be saying it's a machlokes how we see it. Do we see it as the first day is the day of obligation and the rest of the days are makeups, or do we see it that there is equal obligations on all the days? And that would be the argument between these two views.
So the problem that I see is with the korbanot that you have to bring, because if it is in fact only the first day, then you only have to bring one korban of each type on one day and stop, you're done. But if you're considering, then aren't you required to bring for each one of the days?
Oh, you're wondering if you'd be obligated every day to bring an oila and the two shlamim? No, it's a tashlumen zelozeh, meaning it's equal obligations that you do it the first day, you do it a different day, and they're not called makeups for the other. I mean, even though the Gemara uses the term tashlumen zelozeh, but it just means that they're interchangeable, but not that you would be obligated in bringing every single day. That's not the argument. It's only, the question is only if the obligation on the other days of the holiday, are they equal to the first, or they're only makeups for the first? But not that you would have to bring on every single day. That's not that wouldn't be. You don't worry. You're not obligated bringing on every single day. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say we can again think back from Elkanah. He didn't walk to Jerusalem in one day. It took him a few days. So the guy didn't prepare before the first day. If he starts on the second day, if he lives more than a couple of days from Jerusalem, he's not going to make it.
Obviously, we're not talking about a case where it's impossible. We're talking about a case where it's possible.
It's not for everybody. It's again, some people will not be able to make it.
Yeah. But the thing is that the Mishnah could still refer to those people. The Mishnah is referring to people that are capable of doing it. Would they be obligated? So it could be that that's the meaning of the Mishnah, that everyone is chayav in re'iyah, even someone who was lame on the first day. It happens. Sometimes you're on crutches, and after a day, it somehow heals it to the extent that you could, you sprained it a little, and now it's better. So